Hello, I'm Jordy. Welcome back to my channel. I am really excited about making this video today. We've got a really cool video, so definitely stay tuned to this one. I've got some amazing stories to tell. In the course of editing the Fort Caroline video, at the end I added on some footage of Timucuan Preserve. And in the course of editing, I was looking up some information online to just add some little facts and figures about the Timucuan Preserve, and I came upon at least 3 really fascinating, interesting stories, and I thought to myself, I can't squeeze this in here. I've got to go back and make another video, because I also felt like I didn't give enough time to the Timucuan Indians. There's more to tell about them, and I feel remiss in not mentioning more about the Timucuan. Really fascinating stuff there. Then there was these incredible stories too of what's the story behind an eccentric, reclusive man who lived all the way back in the Jacksonville jungle for his entire life, and the foundation of his house still exists back there. Who was this guy and what was going on there? We're going to find out more about him. Then, when you take the trail all the way back down to the water, to the lookout tower over the salt marsh, scientists and scholars and historians are hypothesized that there could have been an incredible natural disaster that occurred there at the very time of the French encampment at Fort Caroline at 1564. So what an incredible confluence of events, that there's this amazing natural disaster that may or may not have occurred, but seems likely to me, all the way back in the salt marsh at the time of the French encampment at Fort Caroline. So we're going to go back there and see that and check that out, and I'll talk more about what was this natural disaster. You can start your imagination running now of what could have happened back there. So we got Timucuan, we got an eccentric reclusive man living back in the Jacksonville jungle. We got an incredible natural disaster taking place in 1564, witnessed by the French and written about. That's how we know about it too. And finally, we got, I didn't get to show off very much of the landscape, but we got an incredibly beautiful park that goes through pine flatwoods and the whole maritime hammock and the salt marsh, and we got all kinds of wildlife, and we'll talk more about that. And acres of oyster shells, what are those all about? How come there's acres of oyster shells there? I'll get into that. So it's a beautiful day too. I'm excited to do the hike and get back there. I'm excited to tell these stories, so this is a great video. Stay tuned. We're riding out of my sister's neighborhood here in Jacksonville, Florida. Thank you again to my sister for putting up with me and housing me for a number of months here while I've been transitioning from my own life into travel. We're getting on the road here. We're heading over to Timucuan Preserve, where Fort Caroline is. And yeah, stay tuned. We got an incredible story to tell. I will sign out now, and I'll sign back in when we get closer to the Timucuan Preserve. We are almost here. We are coming up to the Timucuan Preserve. Such a beautiful day here today. It's probably like 75 here in Jacksonville, and just an absolutely spectacular, perfect day to go back on these trails. I haven't been back here in a while. I'm totally excited to get back and go all the way down to the salt marsh. This is probably a several mile long hike I'll do. I think it's got to be a good solid 1 to 2 mile hike back into all the way down to the salt marsh to the lookout tower. So it's going to be a beautiful day for a hike, and we got amazing, fascinating, incredible, awesome stories to show and tell. Lots to do, lots to talk about. I'm excited. Here we are, coming into the Timucuan Preserve. Okay, let me get off this motorcycle and we'll get situated and get going. We're back in one of my favorite places in Jacksonville, all of Jacksonville. We are at the Timucuan Preserve and Old Florida. We got a canopy of live oak trees, Spanish moss, palmettos, beautiful, beautiful place. And as I said, we got at least 2, 3 amazing stories to tell. We're going to get back on the trail. We're going to find out about a man named Willie Brown. Who was Willie Brown? Who was this eccentric man who lived a hermit, reclusive life back in this Jacksonville jungle? Why? Who was he? What did he do? What was his life like back there? We'll talk more about that. We'll talk more about the natural disaster witnessed by the French in 1564 back at the salt marsh when we get all the way back there. And along the way, we'll check out some landscape, talk about some of the wildlife, and we'll talk about the Timucuan. I mean, this was their land. That's what I'm going to get into talking about now. When these first Europeans reached the shores of America, as we discussed in my Spanish and French videos, the French got here 1560s, 1564 maybe. We had the Spanish getting into St. Augustine in 1565. And so when they arrived here, the Timucuan were here. They were the first people living in America who would have seen these first Europeans arrive on the shores. And before the French and the Spanish got here in the 1560s, we had other Europeans making landfall here and sort of discovering Florida first. We had Columbus, as you probably know, 1492, he sailed into the Caribbean. But we had like Ponce de Leon in, I think, 1513. He landed around St. Augustine, so the Timucuan would have seen him sailing up and would have probably been amazed at the sight of Ponce de Leon sailing up. Then about 20 years later, we had De Soto. I think it was Hernando de Soto making landfall and coming ashore. And I think he did some trading with the Indians and some other more unsavory things, like taking a lot of their women, and then which that doesn't usually go over very well, and led to fierce battles and massacres of couple hundred Timucuan being massacred by De Soto. So we'll talk some more about the Timucuan, but let's get back down on the trail. I'm going to pull out a couple notes. We're going to talk Timucuan, and this place even has ancient history. I mean, scholars, historians think that first people to live here go back thousands of years, literally to BC times, and that there's these acres and acres of oyster shells that have been harvested and are on ground that were eaten by human beings, harvested out of the salt marsh and brought ashore to eat. And these oyster beds that you walk over, there's hundreds of acres. The park manager said he thinks there's like 112, 115 something acres of oyster shells that had been eaten over hundreds of years by human beings from BC times all the way through to the Timucuan. To 1500, 1600. So incredible things to see here. Let's get back there and see what's going on. This is the Spanish Pond. Talked briefly about this when I was here last, but this is where it's thought that the Spanish camped out the night before attacking the French in this vicinity. That's why it's named the Spanish Pond, in this vicinity before attacking the French at Fort Caroline and ultimately defeating and massacring them there. So anyway, Spanish Pond, but that's not exactly what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the Timucuan first. So yeah, before the French and the Spanish arrived on these shores, this was Timucuan land, and archaeological digs in St. Augustine have turned up bones and pottery that they believe goes back to about 1100 to 1300 AD. So at a minimum, the Timucuan were here for several hundred years, maybe 300 to 500 years before the Spanish and French arrived. So I find that really, really incredible to think about it in this way, that for about 500 years potentially, these were the Indians' land, and they lived on this land. And think about how well they must have known this land. Like in my lifetime, I've lived all over the place. I've probably lived in a dozen different locations, and I certainly haven't lived for my whole life on the same land that my parents lived on. So imagine living for your entire life on the same land and having that same land be the same land that your parents lived on and their parents lived on and their parents lived on for 500 years. It's no wonder the Indians were like magicians with nature, and it's thought the Timucuan got into crop rotation and were expert hunters and fishermen. And I mean, if you lived on a certain tract of land for 500 years, it's no wonder. I mean, you just must be completely at one and in sync with nature. Like, unbelievable. That's just so incredible to think about, living for so many generations on one tract of land and knowing it that well. It's just remarkable. So I find that very cool. Here's looking back. Look at all this live oaks. It's so cool. So, yeah, and even before that, I mean, who knows how far the Timucuan go back? There's, the first, if we take a step back and we look at like human history in general, if the cradle of civilization, if you want to go back to the Bible and the Garden of Eden, and the cradle of civilization is thought to be in the Persian Gulf area. And so people spread out in every direction from that Persian Gulf area. And as they went east out of the Persian Gulf across Asia to the coast of China, they then went north up the coast of China and into modern-day Russia. And in those times, back, BC times, there was a landmass that connected Russia to North America, to present-day Alaska and Yukon Territory, Canada. So this landmass where the current Bering Sea is has been named Beringia by a Swedish botanist. So people crossed what's now the Bering Sea and walked right over from Russia to North America, and then fanned out across North America and South America, made it all the way down to Florida. So ancestors of the Timucuan have been here for thousands of years. So the Timucuan, I guess, are direct ancestors of these first arrivers. And as I said, they lived on this land for hundreds and hundreds of years before Europeans arrived here. So we'll start to walk back now, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the Timucuan. But that is a backdrop to think of living on a certain tract of land for many, many, many generations. It's said that they think the Timucuan even learned to go fish for whale, like hunt whale. I mean, can you imagine hunting whale on a canoe with man-made spears and weapons? I mean, incredible, just incredible. So let's progress back on the trail. At the time the French and Spanish arrived here, it's thought that the Timucuan total number was around 200,000. So 200,000 Timucuan Indians, and their territory spanned from South Georgia down to about Orlando, and east coast to west coast. So all of northeast Florida, central Florida to northeast Florida, from the Gulf of Mexico to the east coast, to the Atlantic Ocean. 200,000 Timucuan, organized into about 35 chiefdoms. And each chiefdom would have thousands of Indians in it, so 35 into 200,000, so thousands of Indians in each chiefdom. And the chiefdoms were kind of loosely affiliated. They weren't under central control. They had alliances. I think they spoke similar dialects or languages, but they weren't centrally controlled. The eastern Timucuan lived in this area and were known as the Mocama tribe. And they were under Chief Satariba, was the chief of this Mocama area. He negotiated an alliance with the French, and they were the ones who basically kept the French alive when they were about to starve for their first winter here. So Timucuan typically lived in villages that contained about 30 houses and about 200 to 300 people. So, and had, I think, a central and a wall kind of around it. So 30 homes, sort of lean-to-esque homes, with 200 to 300 people with maybe a barricade around them. There's some evidence that they understood and employed crop rotation. They grew and ate corn, beans, squash, and other veggies, and they hunted and fished. As I said, maybe even for whales. But they certainly ate shellfish, alligator, manatee, and all the other kinds of fish that are around here, like flounder, trout, bass. The French recorded that they were surprised to discover these Indians were larger in stature, generally speaking, than they were. They were about 4 inches taller in stature. And they had an interesting sport. They had sports. They had a game that's kind of like a cross between football and soccer, where they would have a pole, and they would either kick or throw a ball into this pole for 1 point, and there was a nest at the top of the pole. And if you got the ball into the nest, that was 2 points. So I don't know all of the particular rules of the game, but that's pretty cool. They wore clothes made from moss and animal skins, and they were generally heavily tattooed. Tattoos were gained by great accomplishments, and they were made by poking a bunch of holes into skin and rubbing ash from fire into the holes in your skin to actually make the tattoos. As I said, when the Europeans arrived on these shores in around 1564, their Timucuan numbers were about 200,000. By 1600, just about 30 years later, the numbers had reduced to about 50,000 through both battle and disease. That, when Europeans got here, they introduced viruses and bacteria that native people just can't fend off, and so disease and sickness ran wild with them. And so by 1600, only 50,000 people. 100 years later, by 1700, their numbers had dwindled to only 1,000. So kind of a sad story of them just being taken over and dying from disease and famine. Not famine, disease. The final Timucua were actually captured and enslaved by the Spanish in the end of the 1700s, and there was less than 100 remaining Timucua, and they were captured and enslaved by the Spanish and sent to Cuba. And it's thought that maybe some Timucua remained behind in Georgia and assimilated into the Seminole tribe. And there's actually research currently being done to try to discover if there's any Timucua descendants in Cuba from those last remaining Timucua that were sent to Cuba by the Spanish. Did they, maintain bloodlines, and are there any Timucua descendants in Cuba? Research is being done to look into that. Pretty cool. Hey, so we're now in the Pine Flatwoods. Look at this beautiful country. There's a hawk way up there. Probably can't see it on the GoPro. 2 of them, hawks circling the Pine Flatwoods. Bed of pine needles on the ground, really cushiony and soft and nice to walk on. And heading back through the Pine Flatwoods. Such a wonderful, amazing park. I'm so thankful for this place. I love it. And it's a perfect day to be back here. I don't know if you can hear construction. I don't know what's going on, but there's a bunch of trucks backing up and dumping stuff, and it's kind of ruining my vibe a little bit, but it's too beautiful to let that bother me. So, we're heading back. That was about all I know about the Timucua. Hopefully that paints a little bit of a picture. As I said, though, I just find it most interesting to think about and consider that these people lived here for so many hundreds, if not thousands of years. And I just can't even begin to imagine how well they must have known these lands, like the back of their hand. And it's giving me goosebumps right now to think about just being that synced up with nature. Incredible. So we'll keep walking back. We got our first fascinating, incredible story. We're going to get back here after a ways, and we're going to find out who is Willie Brown. I'll tell you about Willie Brown. What is this foundation of this house back in this Jacksonville jungle? Look at this landscape we're walking through, and think about way back here, we're coming to, a reclusive man lived for his entire life, up to 80 years old, up to the year 1970. All the way back here in these woods by himself. Okay, more to come on Willie Brown. Stay tuned, and you'll learn the fascinating story of Willie Brown. But look at how beautiful this park is. We're coming to another boardwalk here, traversing the Pine Flatwoods. Just spectacular. I could come here every day and be happy. Love it. Okay, I think that kind of gets us out of the pine forest, the pine flatwoods, and now I think this would be considered the maritime hammock. The hammock of, the canopy of live oaks and Spanish moss. Look at all this Spanish moss. Unbelievable. All the palmettos. Big old live oak trees. A lot of magnolias here too. Here's a magnolia coming up right here. Another truly majestic southern tree. The magnolia. And the live oak. Magnolia. Live oak. Okay. We'll be back shortly. Okay, we're coming up to a cool spot here. Little rest area with this kind of majestic live oak. It's really wide and going out in every direction. Check this out. What an amazing tree. Sheets of Spanish moss. Probably silhouetted. I'll try to get this up. Look at this. 3 huge trunks coming out of the ground. Tree. Complete with a bench to sit down on and contemplate the serenity. Okay, onward. got some elevation here. We actually have some hills. Look at this. I think you can probably see the elevation here, going downhill here. That is not a common occurrence in Florida. Still got some mosquitoes out too, which is not super awesome, but I can deal. Lots of palmettos. Now we're going back uphill. Maybe you can tell. Maybe you can't. Maybe you can. Maybe you can't. Look at this awesome tree. This is just a nature tour de force back here. Unspoiled. They say the Timucuan Preserve. So, the Timucuan Preserve spans both sides of the St. Johns River. I will try to pop a map up right now. And as you can see on the map, the Timucuan Preserve spans both sides of the St. Johns River. Where we are right now is on the south side of the river in the Theodore Roosevelt area. And the other side of the river contains the Fort George Island Park and the Big Talbot Island Park and the Little Talbot Island Park. If you didn't see my Little Talbot Island video, check that one out. I went to Little Talbot Island and endeavored to do a hike there, but there were too many mosquitoes, so we just went down to the driftwood beach and saw amazing driftwood. Fantastic hike, fantastically beautiful there. It was at sunrise, so check that video out, super cool. So this whole Timucuan Preserve on both sides of the river encompasses 46,000 acres, 46,000, making it one of the largest, most unspoiled salt marshes on the whole East Coast. And is habitat to, as you might imagine, all kinds of animals. If we're speaking mammals, there's even bobcats here. In the waters, there's dolphins. There's fox. There's obviously things like raccoon. But you got some bobcats back here. Maybe not here, probably on the other side of the river. Maybe here. You got manatee in the water. Reptile-wise, you got about a zillion different snakes. Many poisonous, like water moccasins, cottonmouths, eastern diamondback rattlesnakes, pygmy rattlesnakes, maybe copperheads, I'm not sure about that. Coral snakes, and just tons of non-venomous, like racers and garter snakes are probably the most common. Zillions of snakes. Zillions of other amphibians like chameleons, anoles. You get a lot of gopher tortoises here, and gopher tortoises will dig their holes and then be forced to share them with various snakes, which jump in the tortoise holes as well. So, hey, what's up, man? So we got a lot of tortoises around here. Maybe we'll see one today. I'll keep an eye out. A lot of snakes, a lot of lizards. So as I said, 46,000 acres is this whole Timucuan Preserve, of which about 35,000 is salt marsh. So a lot of it is really salt marsh land and is not obviously like hikeable or anything. It's just the marsh, wetlands. But we're fortunate to have some incredible hiking trails like this as part of the Timucuan Preserve, both here in this Theodore Roosevelt area. Little Talbot Island has some great hiking trails, and I want to say the Fort George does too, although I've not been there, so I don't know that definitively. But check out this elevation. I mean, we're going through like, there's some elevation, and the landscape changes as the elevation changes. It's really pretty incredible, remarkable, fascinating. You can probably tell I just love it here. I love the outdoors, and I particularly love our Florida landscape. Speaking of wildlife, you might guess that an area like this would be home to many different species of birds. And if that was your guess, you'd be right. We already saw at the beginning, it looked like some hawks circling overhead. There's red-tailed hawks, red-shouldered hawks. There's bald eagles here. I've often seen bald eagles when I've been out fishing on the intercoastal. We got bald eagle. We got a lot of water type of birds, like heron, egrets, pelicans, storks. You got another big bird of prey, osprey. A lot of osprey around here. Often see them with fish in their claws. Okay, we're coming down to the salt marsh now. Very cool area. Look at this elevation. We're at the top of the hill, the bluff. I think they call this the bluff, overlooking this salt marsh. This is really wild. Really, really cool. Look at this. St. John's River is over there. We're going to get all the way down, not really to the river, but to the different wetlands. Round marsh. So a lot of diverse wildlife, a lot of big birds of prey, and then obviously you got all your various smaller birds, but a lot of big birds of prey around here, from bald eagles to osprey to hawks, and then all of the water birds. Okay, I'm gonna get down this hill and I'll be back. Check it out. Look at this elevation. I'm holding this microphone up because I got that stupid windsock on it, but we're about to head down this hill. I mean, you don't see elevation like this in Florida. This is like serious decline. I'm going to turn the microphone around and head down there, but I call this the Jacksonville jungle. Man, it's some wild country. Love it. Look at back up the hill here. The Jacksonville jungle. So you're getting a sense of this landscape. As I've mentioned, we're leading up to the story of Willie Brown. So keep in the back of your mind, Willie Brown. He lived back in these woods his whole life. His whole life. Reclusive man in the woods. Who was Willie Brown? Okay, check it out. The first signs we're walking down this trail. Oyster shells. Look at these are all oyster shells. And there's a word for this, and it's called a midden. I had to look the word up. I'd never really heard it before. And a midden is basically a refuse pile. And they say there's acres, like tens of acres, if not about 100 acres of midden, of oyster shells here, that are remnants of ancient humans, pre-Columbian, pre-Christopher Columbus, pre-Europeans, pre-Timucuan. A lot are probably from the Timucuan, but I mean, we're basically walking through like an archaeology site, because I don't know if you can see with the GoPro, everywhere you look are oyster shells. So how cool is that? Check it out. Just oyster shells just strewn about in the ground. Giant acres of refuse from hundreds of years of humans sitting up here and shelling and eating oysters. Unbelievable. On we go. Here we go. Just stepping across more of the midden, oyster shells. Look. Just walking along. And this is all just part of the midden. Here's a monster live oak tree. Big monster. It's got to be 100 years old. Look at the shells. These have been here for a very long time. This isn't some hikers who just passed through here last weekend. Look at this, just incredible. I mean, this is literally like an archaeology site. These shells could be hundreds of years old. The Jacksonville jungle. Walking through the midden. Like I said, I mean, it could be as big as 100 acres. 100 acres of a refuse pile of hundreds of years of human beings eating oysters overlooking this salt marsh. I mean, if that doesn't ignite your imagination, I'm at a loss then, because it blows my mind away that I'm walking across lands right now that go back to BC civilizations people, human beings, hunting and gathering on this very ground beneath my feet. We've come to kind of the top of the bluff here. Look at this lookout. Oh, I was just thinking, because I thought I heard one, although you usually don't hear them until nighttime, but another bird that we have a lot of in this area, and especially probably in these lands, are owls. And I'm not certain how many kinds there are, but I know of one that's called the barred owl. And I love trying to see owls. They're hard to spot. They usually come out around dusk, nighttime. It's when you hear them, but it's hard to see them. If you catch one in flight, they're obviously quite big, very large, so you'll notice it if you catch one in flight. You can see maybe the St. Johns River out there too. And this is the salt marsh. Maybe you can see that right there. So we're overlooking the salt marsh, and this is where, for hundreds of years, human beings gathered these oysters and either shelled them here to bring back to their villages for food, or just shelled and ate them right here. Either way, it's like a present-day archaeology site. Okay. Man, I love GoPros. But because they're so wide angle and have such a small sensor, they don't really allow you to get a close-up depiction of what the scene is really like. Everything is so small and looks so far away. But it's the best we got, and it's all we got. So that's what we're working with. But it doesn't always give you a really accurate sense or feeling of the environment. Look at this midden here. Check this all out. All of these shells. This is what I'm talking about. Unbelievable. Hundreds of years old. Can you see the white dots everywhere? Just shells everywhere. Truly, truly remarkable. More huge ones. There's the salt marsh below. In the light, you can see the water. Gators. I didn't mention gators. You got some gators around here too. Alligators, Florida gators. Look at this tree. Arched over. this. Midden. Just mounded into the land. Incredible. We've reached the bluff overlook, salt marsh in the St. Johns River, ships off in the distance. Maybe you can even see the moon up there. Beautiful scenery, absolutely gorgeous. And I have managed to locate something that I'd looked for before, but I don't think I've ever actually come upon. So we got an additional story to add into the mix. Another fascinating moment of intrigue. Check this out. What do we have back here? Check it out. We have a headstone. Sergeant John Nathan Spearing, 1812 to 1879. So what's the deal with this? Well, I'd heard about this. I've never come upon it back here. It's up at the top of this bluff overlooking the water. And so it's written about as one of the more mysterious features of the Timucuan Preserve. And John Nathan Spearing was a Confederate veteran who actually owned this parcel of land before selling it to the Browns. And he ran a shipyard in what's now in downtown Jacksonville, the Stadium District. And on February 28th, 1862, he enlisted in the Confederate Army during the Civil War. Then at age 49 or 50, he was a first sergeant in the Florida Infantry's 8th Regiment Company. He served for less than 3 months before being discharged due to a disability on May 17th. Spearing and his family built Shell Mount, the house on the bluff, I guess right around here, on this bluff overlooking the water, where the Browns later lived until the Browns lost their home to a fire. His widow, Margaret, Spearing's widow, Margaret, later sold the property of the Browns, and the location of the grave was eventually lost due to continued erosion and shell removal on the bluff. In 1961, Spearing's granddaughter and the United Daughters of the Confederacy purchased the current headstone from the Georgia Marble Company and installed it here. So, John Spearing, we got a grave marker headstone of a Confederate Armyman. Lots of intriguing, mysterious stories to be found contained back in the Timucuan Preserve. And people place oyster shells on top of the headstone. So how's that for another just fascinating little bit and piece about the Timucuan Preserve? And the trail has taken us right down to the water's edge. As I've said, it's an absolutely spectacularly beautiful day today. We're at the salt marsh at the edge of the St. Johns River. You can see how this entire trail is lined with the oyster shells. It's literally giving me goosebumps to walk around here because these have just been here for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And Well, that's into the sun. Ooh, big fish just jumped. Probably a trout. Could be a mullet. We're heading over to, we're all along the water here. Very cool. We're going over to the lookout tower, which looks out over what's called Round Marsh. Look at all of the seagrass is washed up because we've had all these hurricanes and storms, so these lands have been really flooded here. And wow, I've never seen this like this before. This is really remarkable. All of these reeds that have washed up. All of these hurricanes that we've had have really flooded this area. Man, it must have been interesting times during the hurricanes with all of this stuff. And cool, we're up to the lookout tower. Which, what does that mean? If we're at the lookout tower, then it's time for the natural disaster story. The mysterious potential natural disaster that rocked this location in 1564. What was it? What happened? I'm about to tell you. Let's go up the tower. What a great park. Once again, such a blessing to have this. This is Round Marsh. Sun's right in our eyes, so it's probably going to be kind of silhouetted. Fish are jumping out there. So here we are at Round Marsh, the location of my potential incredible natural disaster. And it's named Round Marsh, obviously because it's round, but it's so unique and pronounced that historians and scholars have thought of a couple scenarios for why it may be round. One could be human origin. Ancient humans, ancient civilizations may have cultivated this land and made it into a rice paddy with the water and the irrigation. It could have been a good location for rice. But in 2012, University of North Florida professor John Huebner proposed that the marsh may actually be the crater of a meteor strike. Boom, that's our natural disaster story. Now, the reason that it's plausible, and I'm on board with it, I think it sounds very plausible to me, is that it's corroborated by René Goulain de Laudonnière. He was the founder of Fort Caroline, the man who commanded the first ship from the French to arrive here. And he wrote of witnessing an especially marvelous and destructive stroke of lightning that hit near the fort in 1564. So this professor at the University of North Florida, Professor Huebner, believes that it's consistent with a meteor strike. And if his theory is correct, it would be one of only about 1,400 meteor strikes witnessed by a human being in human history. So I have the actual writing that Charles René Goulain de Laudonnière of Fort Caroline in 1564. This is what he wrote. He wrote, "On August 29th, there fell on the fort such a stroke of lightning that I think it more worthy of interest and of being recorded than any unusual thing that has yet come to pass, more strange than historians have ever written about. The fields were at that time all green and half covered with water, and yet the lightning in one instant consumed about 500 acres and burned with such a bright heat that all the birds which lived in the meadows were consumed. This thing continued for 3 days. So, there you have it. Was this the site, the location, in 1564 of a meteor strike, witnessed by the French at Fort Caroline and recorded by them? Such a marvelous lightning strike that it consumed 500 acres and the fire raged for 3 days. Sounds very plausible to me. But at any rate, it's a beautiful scene here. Here's looking out the other way again. St. John's River in the distance, ships, ports, beautiful salt marsh. I have heard some more owls out here, so I've heard some owls. But this is one of our stories of intrigue. Was it a meteor strike here? Put in the comments below. What do you think? Meteor strike? Rice paddy? Act of God? Or of human origin? Or just the natural course of history, and this is how the waters flowed. But it's named Round Marsh because this is a circular, round marshland on the edge of the St. John's River. Okay. That's our intriguing, mysterious story. Now back on the trail, and I still got to tell you about Willie Brown, so stay tuned to find out about Willie Brown. Who is this man? We're heading back away from the water, back inland, and journeying out. I haven't had the occasion to really use my camera. I haven't really taken any pictures. It's hard to make a video and take pictures and alternate between the two, I'm finding, so I'm just kind of content to not photograph today and focus on making this video. Another view of looking back over Round Marsh. Had some water in the trail here. Had to get around. Round Marsh. Meteor strike or rice paddy. Or just the natural progression of nature. Heading back into the Jacksonville jungle.
seriously arched over, completely arched over, like a U, in an inverted U. You can probably notice that the path is all white. We're still crunching along all of the oyster shells. And look at this canopy of oaks. Okay, on to Willie Brown. I think we're almost up at Willie Brown's. I know you're eager to find out all about Willie Brown, and I'm eager to tell you. We have made it. The Willie Brown cabin site. Check it out. There's all these concrete blocks, which are the foundation of Willie Brown's cabin in the woods. So who was Willie Brown? Why is this significant? What does it matter? What's the deal with Willie Brown? Well, I'm about to tell you. So, Willie Brown was a bit of a hermit, was a bit of a recluse. But he also happens to be one heck of a generous recluse. He is the man who owned all of this land. This was his land. Willie Brown. His parents, William Henry and Eliza Brown, had come to Jacksonville from New York City in 1882. They initially settled near downtown on the other side of the St. Johns River. Again, maybe I'll try to put a map up right here. Boom. Map, okay. St. Johns River. Downtown on the other side. So when they got to Jacksonville, having moved here from New York City, shortly thereafter, yellow fever hit, and it killed two of their two daughters. And so, being saddened by that occasion, it gave them reason to move out of the city, and they bought this remote land, get out of the city, wanted to move out into the wilderness and live in isolation. Well, they bought this land from the Spearings, whose gravesite we saw. But the house burned down in the 1900s, and Willie's parents moved off the land. Willie and his brother Saxon stayed right here, back in the Jacksonville jungle. There's a bench over here you can sit on and take it in. Huge live oak trees. Look at the canopy. Some of these trees are probably 100 years old, so they were definitely alive when Willie was here. He walked right beneath a lot of these trees. That's pretty cool to think about. So Willie and his brother Saxon stayed on, and on Willie's 16th birthday, his father gifted him the 600 acres, and asking only that he take care of it and keep hunters off of it. And that's exactly what Willie did for the rest of his life. He lived here until his 80th year, and William Henry Brown III died on December 14th, 1970, right here. He lived all the while up until his 80th year without electricity or running water. Let that sink in for a minute. Living in the Jacksonville jungle, crazy amounts of mosquitoes back here. I'm getting bitten today, but I'm surviving. Lived here until his 80th year without electricity or running water. All he had was a Model T battery and that powered a single light bulb. Unbelievable. So no modern conveniences, no phone, no TV. He said, money can't buy happiness, and this land makes me happy. Willie died with barely enough money for his funeral expenses, but the great nature lover and conservationist gave the greatest gift ever to the city of Jacksonville, all 600 acres, never to be developed. And it has been preserved under his strict guidance and is described by many as Jacksonville's enduring treasure. Willie gave a firm directive about what he wanted to be done with the shells and the trees and the marsh when he was gone. Nothing. He wanted it to remain exactly as is. Nothing would be changed. The gift made national news, and letters poured in from all over the country in thanks. He said he gave the gift so that people could come and learn about God. Although he had never gone to church, he believed that nature was God's secret. It was Willie's request that the land be named after Theodore Roosevelt, hence the Theodore Roosevelt area, the president who made his great speech at the Grand Canyon. And this is what Roosevelt said at the Grand Canyon: "Leave it as it is. You cannot improve on it. The ages have been at work on it, and man can only mar it. What you can do is keep it for your children, your children's children, and for all who come after you." So the land really has not changed at all since 1970. When Willie died, his cabin was here, but it kind of got ruined. Hikers came through and ended up trashing it, and it just sort of fell apart and was removed because it was a danger and a hazard. Park archaeologist John Whitehurst estimates that there are 115 acres of the shells that I've been documenting and walking across. So 115 acres of all of those oyster shells. And what else to say about this? That's about it. So Willie Brown, ladies and gentlemen, gave the greatest gift ever to Jacksonville, all 600 acres, not to be developed, not to be changed, altered in any way. And it gives us the opportunity to walk through, as I would call it, like an actual archaeological site of all of those shells of hundreds of years of history, thousands of years of history even. So Willie Brown, right here, ladies and gentlemen. I'll try to put a picture of the cabin up. Boom. That's Willie Brown's cabin. And he lived here until his 80th year. Here's a picture of him over here. Willie Brown. A love for the land. Willie Brown owned and loved this land where he lived and worked for over 80 years. His day-to-day relationship with the land, plants, and animals instilled a deep love and respect for all of nature. His final wish was to ensure that this land remained undeveloped so that it would be an inspiration to others. Oh, here's a picture of his cabin. Had some windows. There you can see the foundation. It's still here. Here's another picture of Willie out there. Here's another picture of the cabin. Willie lived modestly in this cabin with no electricity, only fresh water from a well, and skill in living off the natural resources the land provided. He survived here until his death in 1970. And finally, here's a quote by Willie. "People have to work in the cities. They can't live in the woods anymore, but they ought to have a place in the woods they can go to." Thank you, Willie. Man, can you imagine living here until your 80th year without electricity? I guess this structure represents where his well was. Willie Brown, ladies and gentlemen. And this beautiful park that we have here is all because of Willie and his generous gift. Thank you, Willie. As I said, cool to imagine these trees are old enough to have been here when Willie was alive. So we can walk beneath these trees that Willie also walked beneath. This one for sure. Look at the size of this monster. Willie lived off the land until his 80th year. I mean, how did one even do that? What did he hunt for? What did he eat? I would love to know more about him. Put anything you know in the comments, Anyone knows anything more about Timucuan Preserve? I'd love to know it, because this place is a special place to me, and I love it. Okay, so that covers our incredible stories. We had 5 stories from this trip. Recap. Number 1, got to learn more about the Timucua and their amazing history. The first human beings who lived here, and got to see the Europeans arrive on these shores. Didn't work out very well for them. My heart's with them. Truly it is. Truly it is. As I said, man, living on this land for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and the degree that they must have been at one with nature, is something to just really marvel at. So the Timucua, amazing story number 1. Willie Brown, the recluse, living in the woods with no electricity, phone, TV, no running water, just a well, living off the land until he was 80 years old, back in the Jacksonville jungle. It's not even the summer right now, and I'm getting lit up by mosquitoes, so it must have just been nuts back here. Then the Round Marsh. Was it a meteor strike? Sounded like the French commander thought so in 1564, something he had never witnessed before and felt compelled to write about because it was so marvelous and unlike anything he had ever encountered in his life. Sounds like a meteor strike to me, one of only 1,400 recorded in human history, right here at this location. And finally, the story of the land itself, letting it speak for itself. Hopefully you're enjoying getting to see more of this amazing Florida landscape, the salt marsh, the pine flatwoods, and the maritime hammock, the 100-year-old live oak trees. Oh, and there was the 5th story. We got to see the gravesite of John Spearing and learn more about him. Civil War history. Lots to take in. A lot to take in. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've really enjoyed making it. I found all these stories to be so intriguing and fascinating and larger than life. And like I said, I was editing the Fort Caroline video, and I thought, there's no way I can fit this in there. I got to get back there, show more of the landscape, and share some of these incredible stories. So I hope you've enjoyed them. Please comment below. Tell me what you think about any or all of it. And like, subscribe. Got plenty of awesome videos coming ahead. Really enjoy trying to share stories, nature. That's what I plan to continue doing. So, hope to see you in the next video, and thanks for hanging out. We're walking out of the maritime hammock, and I'll probably turn the camera back on when we get into the pine flatwoods again, because that's so neat. But I think I'll turn the camera off now and catch you again in the pine flatwoods.